Property tax relief or school funding. The recent press conference proposal by state lawmakers to provide $100 million to $150 million in property tax stabilization grants to municipalities has been presented as a way to support schools while easing pressure on local taxpayers. That goal is understandable and any additional funding is welcome. But for Bridgeport, whose students have long endured the consequences of underfunded systems and short-term fixes, likely are not enough. This proposal raises serious questions that must be answered before it can be judged as progress. In my view, the central issue is not whether municipalities need help. They do. The issue is whether this approach actually strengthens education funding or whether it once again avoids confronting the deeper structural problems that created the crisis in the first place. Bridgeport schools exist within a funding system that has failed to keep pace with reality. The state's education cost-sharing ECS formula was designed to recognize that educating students in high poverty, multilingual, and high-need communities costs more. Bridgeport's student population fits that description more than most. Yet year after year, the Formula S Foundation has remained frozen in time since 2013 while costs have risen year after year, leaving districts like Bridgeport permanently playing catch-up. Against that backdrop, it is fair to ask, does a municipal property tax grant address the state's education equitable funding responsibility? The state has a dual responsibility to distressed municipalities, fully fund pilots for non-taxable properties, and fully fund the ECS and increase the foundation. These two responsibilities should not be conflated and allowed to be merged to supplant one another. Another concern is how this proposal interacts with the minimum budget requirement MBR. The MBR exists for a reason, to prevent new state dollars from replacing, rather than supplementing local education funding. Because the current proposal is framed as property tax relief rather than direct school aid, it is unclear whether existing MBR protections apply or whether new ones would be established. That uncertainty matters, especially in Bridgeport, which funds its schools with the lowest per pupil contribution in the entire state. Bridgeport's history shows that when funds arrive without any requirements, the risk of supplantation is real. Money intended to help schools can be redirected to ease general fund pressures instead, potentially leaving classrooms no better off than they were before. That outcome may satisfy budget spreadsheets, but it does not serve students, so several questions must be openly addressed. How will these funds be distributed equally or equitably? Will municipalities receiving these grants be required to maintain or increase their local education contribution? Will MBR calculations reflect this additional funding boost or lock in last year's funding and we end up having to reduce next year's budget by this year's gain? Will the state publicly track whether funding actually increases in districts like Bridgeport? Will lawmakers commit, explicitly promise that these grants do not replace the need to reform and fully fund ECS beginning this year and going forward? Without clear answers, municipal boards of education in distressed municipalities should proceed cautiously in developing their budgets. There is also a local dimension that deserves the city's attention. Mayor Joe Ganim has already publicly committed to increasing Bridgeport's local education contribution by $5 million per year, including this year and next. That promise at a minimum must be kept. The situation is so dire we most definitely will need more in my view. Any additional state aid, whether through ECS or other means, should be considered irrelevant and separate from the promised minimal relief. This point is important to reemphasize. Additional state dollars are not a substitute for local funding. If the city is serious about strengthening its case in Hartford, that $5 million commitment should be treated as a minimum floor, not a negotiated number that disappears once outside dollars arrive. This is not about calling out local leadership. This is a moment for serious, disciplined collaboration rather than political theater, but partnership requires clarity. City leaders, the Board of Education, and state lawmakers share a responsibility to ensure that taxpayer dollars actually result in stronger schools, not just temporarily balanced budgets. Property tax grants may offer short-term relief, but it does not resolve the issue. And for inner-city students who are overwhelmingly Black, Latino, immigrant, and low income, temporary relief without structural reform has been the norm, not the exception. That is why this moment is pivotal. The state has resources. Bridgeport has options and could do more. We need to ensure that any reform does not cloud the lines of responsibility. New state monies from Hartford should be routed directly to school districts, much like Alliance grants, not funneled through the city as property tax relief. This will eliminate any possibility of supplanting local responsibility under a shroud of smoke and mirrors budgeting. This should be done in conjunction with raising the ECS Foundation amount immediately to $16,500 and linking it to inflation going forward. Districts need stable, increasing dependable funding from the state, not an election year band-aid. Bridgeport's children do not benefit from temporary fixes. They benefit from sustained state and local investment and clear accountability at every level. State leaders held accountable for their underfunding and city leaders held accountable for theirs. Before celebrating this proposal, lawmakers of Bridgeport and communities like it deserve clear answers. I suggest that when lawmakers draft this bill, they do so in a clear manner that ensures every single dollar goes straight to the education budget and used to supplement, not supplant other state and local funding responsibilities and promises. This way, we the voters know who is responsible for any shortfall and could hold leadership accountable. Joseph Sokolovic, Vice Chair, Bridgeport BOE. Opinions are my own, not the board's. The facts belong to everyone.